This series is all about universes, multiverses, planets, worlds, continents, and cities. We're delving not into specific games, but into the Milieu's created for them. We'll be looking at where these settings came from, their major features, and why you should consider them for your own gaming experiences. When it comes to worlds written for fantasy, whether gaming or literature or both, there are several takes on what level of detail is necessary. Some worlds like light touch, such as the original Greyhawk campaign set, which gave some facts and figures but largely avoided microscopic details. And then you have Glorantha, which, while patchy and incomplete in places, represents an amazing level of detail for the more well-developed regions. And then you have Hârn, with its attendant game, Hârnmaster. Hârn, like many of the worlds on our list of Milieus, began life as a setting for a home Dungeons & Dragons game, but this time for one N Robin Crossby. Crosby was born in London in 1954 and in the 1960s experimented with role-playing with his siblings using a map of Atlantis that he had drawn and fashioned a backstory for. He emigrated to Canada in 1968 with his family, and there he attained an associate's degree in philosophy and worked on electronic circuitry installation. Transferring to Simon Fraser University after 1976, Crosby co-founded the Society for the Protection of Large and Pleasant Dragons, or SPLUD, as a board game club, which played some games Crosby had designed himself. With all of this mix, he discovered Dungeons & Dragons and began to develop role-playing settings that would eventually coalesce into Hârn. The world he fell to detailing that he named Githera, and he designed a game system around it that he named Hârn, after an island off the larger landmass of the continent of Lithia. By the close of the 1970s, Crosby was taking his world and game to prospective publishers, and a Canadian company called Gamma 2 Games expressed interest. In 1980, Crosby had gained a contract to turn his notes into a product, and following the company's name change to Columbia Games in 1982, coupled with a shift in geographic location from Canada to the United States, this arrived in 1983 as Hârn Regional Module. I remember seeing this sat on a shelf in a wargaming shop in York, right next to the World of Greyhawk box set. The Greyhawk set had better art, an easy painting of knights thundering across the land. The Hârn book, though, reminded me of Traveller, a minimalist black, white and red cover, but with what looked like one of the topographic maps in our school textbooks, front and centre. I didn't get the book at that point. My pocket money stretched to the Greyhawk set, and my friend bought back Games Workshop's battle cars, and we spent the rest of the summer exploring the Flanaess and shooting rockets and flamethrowers across an urban landscape. However, with birthday money in hand before the school term began, I did pay a visit to my local toy shop, which stocked, of course, Dungeons & Dragons, alongside copies of Tortured Souls, more of that in another video, and Judges Guild modules and other more obscure game books, even for that time, than the shiny shops of Games Workshop and the like did. What made it even better for me was that this role-playing stock was set in a dingy corner of the toy shop proper, one that, for me as a 13-year-old, held mystery and wonder, the feeling of exploring an ancient lost library. The other kids were in the shinier part of the shop, picking up their He-Man dolls and plastic paraphernalia. But there was me, in with the books, seeing if I could find anything that I'd seen but couldn't previously afford or that looked attractive to me. And there, in a bin containing a mixture of non-TSR, non-GDW books, I encountered the regional module once more. This work fascinated me. I devoured the Greyhawk set over the course of 2 weeks. It was pretty, had marvellous art. Its layout was wonderful. In the regional module, no box set at this point in Hârn's history, were 2 books and a map. The art was minimal at best. The layout comprised of what looked like typed pages. It was pretty ugly, But once through that, the material it contained was just so much more dense than anything offered by the Greyhawk set. It taught me something about the trade-off between dense, ugly-looking pages presenting a mass of information versus open, easier-to-read pages representing far fewer facts. It was a slow starter to read, but the pace got quicker once my eyes and brain had got used to its mode. The books included were Hârn View, a 32-page overview of Hârn itself, including additional rules to whatever game system you wanted, to determine specific Hârnesque details for characters, species, sex by species, birth date, birthplace, social class, occupation, relationship to the head of a character's clan, and estrangement, the relationship that the character had with the rest of his clan. These tables would serve as harbingers for what was to come. Alongside this, the book provided a timeline and historical narrative for Hârn, notes on the major nations and cultures, campaign event generation, advice on scenarios, weather generation, encounters, and more. And the second book was Hârndex, an alphabetically organised sourcebook, 64 pages in length, providing entries for cities, geographical points of interest, historical events, people, guild pricing, and pretty much everything. The set proudly proclaims itself to be a breakthrough in fantasy role-playing play aids, with more than 5 years of R&D having gone into creating it. And trust me, the attention to detail found throughout the work shows just that. As an odd aside, Pathfinder, in gaming terms, used to be a copyright owned by Columbia Games and is used for their hex mapping products. I just found that mildly amusing for whatever reason. Through 1984 and 1985, Columbia released several supplements that expanded on the lore contained within the Hârn set. Cities of Hârn, detailing a handful of prominent settlements. Gods of Hârn, supplements on Ivinia, a northern region, the continent of Lithia, and Rethem, a kingdom in the southwest of Hârn itself, marketed as regional and kingdom modules respectively. And a wonderful 17-volume series labelled the Encyclopedia Hârnica. This latter comprised 16 numbered volumes plus an entry on the continent of Lithia itself. Cities of Hârn and the Encyclopedia Hârnica set out a common format for supplements regarding Hârn and its world. Instead of a standard page numbering, entries were referenced by subject and page number within that subject. So, for example, the city of Koranen, described within Cities of Hârn, covers 7 pages, labelled Koranen 1, Koranen 2, and so on. The concept was to enable users of the material to cut the booklets up and arrange them as they wished within binders. It was up to individuals as to how they wished the information organised. Perhaps all cities together, perhaps all articles relevant to a particular area together, perhaps even simply alphabetically across the entire series. The encyclopedia covered a number of different subjects within each volume: cities, kingdoms, species, crime, economy, astronomy, heraldry, and more. A clever idea, as it enabled material to be written in a more piecemeal fashion, while giving the end user the ability to arrange things that best suited them. 1986 was a major landmark in the development of Hârn. A handful of supplements were released: Azadmir, Evael, Kaldor, and Kandé, to add to the growing lore materials. But alongside these, the full, intricate game Crosby had developed for creating characters and running games within his world arrived. Hârnmaster, probably the most microscopically detail-oriented role-playing game out there. Hârnmaster recorded all of the bases set down in the original Hârn set: species, sex, birth date, astrology, estrangement, all of that, and added measures of their strength, their endurance, their dexterity, their agility, their speed, their eyesight, their hearing, their sense of smell and taste, their sense of touch, quality of voice, intelligence, aura, will, morality, psyche, and piety. A skill-based system, Hârnmaster possessed no levels, instead having players assign skills from bases defined by profession and other factors, with character improvement occurring via experience, practice and training. In many ways, Hârnmaster is similar in its character definitions to RuneQuest, but provides much finer detail. Hârnmaster attempts to simulate a gritty, quasi-realistic medieval setting, which in many ways requires a lot more things to be nailed down over RuneQuest's more heroic era, fantastical depiction of companion world, Glorantha. Much like the encyclopedia, Hârnmaster split subjects by page within subject, Bestiary 1, Bestiary 2, and so on, rather than overall page number. And also coded pages by symbols, noting which pages were open for all players at the table to reference, which ones were referee only, and which ones were by discretion of the referee. More supplements into 1987 included Araka Kalai, Castles of Hârn, Chibisa, Menglana, Manassas Castle, Orbal, Peran, Son of Cities, and Tharda, alongside Hârn lore. Now, this work was similar to the Encyclopedia Hârnica, except that it did not present articles by subject pages, and was more of a magazine format, including a letters page, editorials, and so on. Hârn lore ran for 11 issues into 1992, and covered an eclectic selection of subjects through its lifetime. The supplements released in 1987 also displayed an increasing reference back to Hârnmaster, where earlier supplements had been careful to stay system neutral. By the time 1988 came around, virtually all Hârn supplements were written with an assumed use of Hârnmaster, and the system neutrality disappeared. 100 Bushels of Rye, A Dead of Winter, Pilot's Almanac, and the Staff of Fanon all came out in that year. 1989 saw the first of the Tomes of the Ancient and Esoteric Mysteries, books of spells, each covering a form of magic. Books on Laiafi, the Pelaine traditions, they arrived in 1989, and Jmorvi, Fivria, Odovish, and Savoria arrived in 1991 to complete the series. An adventure supplement describing Kiraz, a lost dwarven city, provided a companion adventure to the Staff of Fanon, and was the only other 1989 Hârn volume. The original Hârn set was revised and republished as Hârn World in 1990, along with Shek Bavar, a Hârnmaster expansion on magic, and the Tome of Grey Mysteries, a book of neutral spells. Other than the aforementioned tomes of ancient and esoteric mysteries, the only 1991 volume covered the region of Shorkine, and Hârn Manor and Castles of Orbal arrived in 1992. Output was certainly slowing, with Curse of Hlen, Part 3 of the adventure series that began with the Staff of Fanon, being the only output of 1993, and Hârn Player, the Player's Guide to Hârn, arriving in 1994. The second edition of Hârnmaster came out in 1996, along with Hârnmaster Magic, the second edition of Shek Bavar, and Nasty, Brutish and Short, a guide to Hârn's orcs, came out in 1997. From 1998, things started to get messy. Columbia Games continued with their second edition Hârnmaster line, but Crosby, wishing to hone Hârnmaster into an ever-increasingly realistic point, self-published a revision of first edition. Crosby had become dissatisfied, along with a fair number of Hârnmaster players, in the more simplified route that Columbia was taking with its second edition. This led to Crosby stopping to write for Columbia in 1994, focusing instead on his own edition. Columbia released Hârnmaster Religion and Hârnmaster Barbarians in 1998 and 2000 respectively, and in 2001 an Australian video game company, Hârn, worked with Crosby and Columbia in an attempt to create a Hârn computer game. The output of this was an adventure, the Tapestry Saga Web of the Widow, which was released by Hârn and Columbia in two forms, one under the Hârnmaster 2nd edition rules and the other under the D20 license that was built on Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition. While the potential for creating a Hârn video game ended a year earlier, with Electronic Arts putting the plug on Hârn, at least they had something to show for their efforts. Crosby founded Kelestia Productions as a company to release Hârn products, written both by him and Hârn's fans, and this bore fruit in 2003 with the publication of Avanekin. In the meantime, Colombia released a mixture of Hârnmaster and D20 products for Hârn, including Trowbridge Inn, adapted from previous encyclopedia information, Dunere Keep, Avail, Selvos Castle, Hârn Tournaments, Glenoth Keep, and City of Golotha from 2001 to 2003. In 2003, Colombia simplified Hârnmaster even further, releasing a third edition, while Kelestia released an edition of Crosby's updated first edition, named Hârnmaster Gold, formatted to enable people using other game systems to inject some Hârnic sensibilities into their exploration of Hârn and the surrounding territories. Colombia also released Carveth Castle and Olakand Castle. From 2004 on, Colombia and Kelestia followed their own paths with Hârn, creating two distinct versions of both the game and its attendant world. In the period 2004 to 2006, Colombia released Kaldor, Kanday, the City of Tarjal, and Gadiran Castle, while Kelestia released Atlas Kelestia, Hârnmaster Gods, Coladis, Cathera, and the Kingdom of Chelempi. N Robin Crossby was diagnosed with liposarcoma of the bowel in 2006, but he continued to work and blog during his illness, completing an entire map of Hârn's world in the process. Colombia releases for 2007 and 2008 included Hârnic Christmas, Field of Daisies, Hârn Herblore, and Hârn Potions, while Kelestia released the Hârn regional map and the Kingdom of Ledenheim. N. Robin Crossby passed from his illness, despite operations and treatment, on the 23rd of July 2008. After his passing, intellectual property to Hârn was granted to Arian Crosby, his eldest daughter. She has continued to hold this, and Kelestia has continued to release Hârn material, citing itself as the only official custodian of Hârnic canon, while Colombia continued to produce new Hârnic publications of their own, alongside making older Hârn products available via Drive-Thru-RPG. From the Colombia stable from 2009 arrived Tomes and Scrolls, Astrology, Bedines, Earthmaster, Heraldry, Households, Hunting, Pamasani, Retham, Melderin, and iterations of Hârn as a setting, and Hârn world as, well, what has always been an overview of the setting and its intricacies. From Kelestia, a map of Shorkine, and a region description of Venerive. All of that brings us up to 2014 in this chronology of releases. Just an aside here before wrapping up. In 2010, Iron Crown Enterprises released a Hârn guide aimed at high-action role-playing, the Harp game. This presents some interesting options, but I feel that Harp is too much of a fantasy-oriented system to make it work as well as the other options available. Harp can also act as a gateway into Rolemaster, which again could make something of Hârn itself, but may dilute some of its subtler details of the setting in its form. Mileage varies, of course, and it's nice to have the options. Kelestia's website has kept reasonably healthy flow of news and articles regarding Hârn and Hârnmaster, their release of it, that is. Bringing this history section bang up to date, Kelestia have released a PDF version of their new edition of Hârnmaster. Hârnmaster, Role-Playing in the World of Cathera, with their hard copy set to arrive later in 2024. Harkening back to the previous likening that I made between Hârnmaster and RuneQuest, I find it a little wry smile at the tagline Kelestia that have chosen for this, echoing the latest iteration of the RuneQuest rules, role-playing in Glorantha. And the two detailed RPGs most closely tied to their particular worlds chose that form. It's perhaps a coincidence, or perhaps not. But either way, it is fitting for both. This being a Milieu video rather than a rules review one, I'll focus more on Hârn and Kythera as a setting than Hârnmaster as a game, although certainly Hârnmaster is on the list of games to review, especially now that there is a new edition of it out there. Hârn presents a fantasy facsimile of the early to middle medieval period, with a particular focus within Hârn itself and the regions of the continent of Lithia immediately neighbouring it, on parallels to Anglo-Saxons, Normans, Vikings, and their 8th through to 12th century contemporaries, although it does include some anachronistic technologies. The primary focus is on the island of Hârn, a landmass approximately 2 to 3 times the size of Great Britain, which comprises a number of feudal kingdoms and one Viking-influenced one, surrounded by a scattering of barbarian groups. In some ways, these kingdoms resemble a mixture of the Anglo-Saxon heptarchy, European feudal states, and Tolkien-esque mirrors to Arnor and Gondor and the like. Geographically interesting, all of these groups have plenty of room to generate conflict, diplomacy, and trade, components of which colour the background against which the player characters adventure. Religion plays a large part in the world, and which gods are worshipped defines much of the moral compass that states and individuals follow. A pantheon of 10 major gods and many minor gods exert their influence upon the kingdoms and the tribes, further adding to the setting's colour and tensions. For folks wanting impressive displays of wizards hurling fireballs and lightning bolts at each other, Hârn may disappoint. Magic here is subtle and highly organised, with 6 convocations, ancient and esoteric orders of Shekvar, laying down rules and philosophies through which magic is governed. Fireballs, or their equivalent, are less subtle potentials through the Pelean convocation, a rough equivalent to D&D's invocation, and probably the closest thing that Hârn has to D&D's wizards in general. Laavi covers illusion and manipulation of light. Jamorvi are magical creators and artificers. Savoya, magical scholars and mind wizards. Odivsha are practitioners of water magic, and Fivria covers life and earth magic and healing. Hârn itself is within the political gravity of those regions of its neighbouring landmass, Lithia, which happens to be Kythera's largest continent. Migrations from Lithia have created a fair chunk of Hârn's historical background, most notably the rulership of the Kingdom of Orbal, a realm in northern Hârn that is under the sway of Ivinian conquerors from northern Lithia. Hârn is a setting for those that appreciate an eye for detail, and where every cog has been polished and carefully placed to mesh with everything else. Unlike, say, the Forgotten Realms, for example, which presents a potpourri patchwork of regions and kingdoms and cities of note, Hârn carefully describes its material on a city or kingdom or region within the context of its neighbours and its interactions with them, or those that it's having. While the various supplements display a snapshot of the setting, I think that this is a necessary thing for a more dynamic presentation, where the timeline of events keeps moving forward with every release, would not lend itself so much to the mode chosen for the detail of the material releases. In summary, Hârn presents a reasonably sized, with much greater potential surrounding it, very much suited to a rule set of complexity that can do the detail justice. It is mid to low magic, low to mid medieval, and has plenty of echoes of real world context, by design, as stated by Crosby in his introduction to the original Hârn releases, intended to make the setting feel familiar yet different. I would say if you're an experienced referee looking for a setting in which you can disappear down a rabbit hole, scooping up lore aplenty for your player characters to find adventure in, then yes, it is a setting well worth looking into, either to inspire your own world building or to use to much satisfaction as it is. If, however, you are a new referee, you may find it daunting. from the sheer amount of lore material to the relative lack of published adventures, to help you get started. Hârnic lore is dense and replete with hooks for adventuring, but is rarely upfront other than short adventure nuggets. For me, looking back on that 13-year-old who was already at that point devouring any materials that I could fuel the furnace of my own world building, the Hârn tomes came along at a perfect time. The maps are brilliant, the lore is deep and dense, and the presentation of it, while not being pretty, was certainly organised.